Good morning, my sweet babies. And here is installment one of Reading with Miss Anthony. Today's book is called January's Sparrow by my favorite author. Not one of my favorites, my absolute favorite, Patricia Polacco. And a little bit about the author before we start reading. Miss Polacco is known for her books telling all types of stories and teaching lessons. Some other classics are Mr. Lincoln's Way, tackles fighting equality and racism. In My Mother's House, which talks about same gender households. So get into it. I'm excited. A little background about our book. Miss Anthony is going to be reading the book the way it is written. It is in Southern dialect. And that just simply means it'll be some broken language. So you also have to keep in mind this that the slaves, and this book is taking place in slavery and sharecropping era, the slaves inside of this story were not taught to read. So they spoke using the language that they had heard, not what they had learned. I want us to keep that in mind as we read. Just some nuggets to put in your Dropbox. You will hear words like slaves, right? You hear words like, auction, mm, words like runaway, words like master. And I want you to keep all those small nuggets in your mind as we read because we are going to jump right into it. January Sparrow is an AR read. It is level 4.0 and worth 1 point. What I'll do, guys, so you can get the most of reading with Miss Anthony is I'll put the page on the screen, then pull the page back, and then I will read the page. So you guys can get the image as well as get a feel for the words. Welcome again to Reading with Miss Anthony. January Sparrow by Patricia Polacco. All right. And all the information about accelerated read I gave you guys in the front. We're not going to read the prologue, but I am going to put the images to the screen so you can see them. The juice of the day. All right, let's read, guys. Sadie, the youngest crosswhite, shuddered when she saw the paddy rollers thunder into the slave yard on their horses, dragging a runaway on the end of a rope behind them. All of the slaves had been ordered to stand at the porch rail that morning. They all feared the same thing on the plantation. Master Francis Giltner, Sadie's mom and daddy, Sarah and Adam Crosswhite, and all her brothers gripped at the rail when they saw him rolling up in his fine carriage, sitting right next to his youngest son, David, and his nephew, Francis Troutman. The paddy rollers hollered and whooped as they skidded to a dead stop. They hauled off in their horses and tussled the runaway to his feet. Sadie almost fell to her knees when she saw who it was they was dragging. It was January. He had been held so dear to her and her family for as long as she could remember. Her heart fair broke as they smote him and pushed him face down in the dirt to stake his arms and legs. Sadie knew January was fixing to run. He told her himself only 2 days before. When he upped and did it, Sadie prayed he'd cross the river and make it to Indiana. But now she could see that it wasn't a flick of a sorry dog's tail afore they done caught him and brung him back. Oh, poor January. Master Giltner stood over January. This here, dirt-eating, lazy, no-account known as January Drum, took up and ran. I want you all to see what happens to any brown-skinned devil that runs away from me, he thundered. Then he motioned to the two men holding black snake whips. They was Jimmy Lee and Willie Ford, his paddy rollers and overseers. First Ford whipped January across his back so hard that it cracked the air. With each lash, January's flesh opened up in long red stripes, almost to his rib bones. Then, while Ford was taking a dipper of water, Lee commenced to whip in January in the other direction, so as to make his flesh stand up in squares. Lee and Ford whipped and kicked the rags right off from him, but they didn't make January holler. Sadie's brother Ben could hardly stand. His knees kept giving out with each stroke of the whip. Even though the master had ordered all of them to watch, Ben just hung his head. When the beating was done, Lee and Ford rubbed salt and pepper into January's open back. His skin jerked, quaked, and January twisted and puked up, but he never cried out. If I was going to give January a character trait, I'd say he was strong, stubborn, strong-willed. Sarah, Sadie's mom, stumbled past January to Master Giltner's carriage and his son, David. Sarah held David's mama in her arms. Sarah had held David's mama in her arms when she was getting him born, but his mama died birthing him. No one knew what to do, so Sarah took that baby home with her. She took him to her own chest, even when the other slaves would say, "You loving on one of them white folks? It's like a dog loving the hickory what beats it." But love him she did, and he loved her back. His own daddy hated the sight of him. He blamed that baby for his wife's death, but Sarah Crosswhite was the onlyest person that loved David. So when her eyes fell on his now, all he could do was turn away. By the time the sun set that evening, and everyone walked through the slave yard from the fields, January was gone. Each of them looked where he had laid and bowed their heads and touched their hearts. When Sarah and the children arrived home that night, they were all in silence. Adam, their daddy, arrived late carrying a shovel, his clothes covered in mud because he'd been digging a grave. They all knew who their grave was for. Hmm. Sadie burst into tears and ran to the window light just above her cot and took a small wooden sparrow from the window sill. She held the sparrow next to her cheek as tears burned in her eyes. January had whittled it just for her. She ran her fingers over each of his feathers that he had carved so carefully. She remembered January whispering to her when he put it in her hands, "It's fixing to fly, and so is I." She'd known he was gonna run, but she'd said nothing. She'd, she's known he was gonna run, but she said nothing to no one. Now her heart ached at the thought that she hadn't told her mama and daddy, because maybe they could have stopped January. Then he wouldn't have been beaten and he'd still be here. Sadie cried herself to sleep. The night was still and black, and the next thing Sadie knew, she was shaking awake. "Wake up, Sadie, wake up," her mama whispered breathlessly. "But why, mama? What's happening?" Sadie moaned. She fussed and cried, but she got up. "Get dressed and pack only what you can carry, and don't light the lantern," Adam warned. So all of them fared their way around the cabin, pulling out clothes and crawling into them. The rest they stuffed into burlap bags. Sadie's heart was racing. All of the children and their mama huddled around the door into the darkness. "Hark now," her daddy whispered. "We is gonna cross water tonight." Everyone looked at one another. Sadie just didn't understand what had happened. "Now all you stay close to me. Thaddeus Quill is coming to take us to the boat," Adam said. When Thaddeus arrived, they all sneaked out, not making a sound. They crossed the slave yard, went by the big house, and finally stood near the bottoms. Just as they were about to start into Eliza's woods, Sadie suddenly cried out, Sarah clapped her hand over Sadie's mouth. Quiet, girl, Sarah warned. My sparrow! January's sparrow! I left it on the windowsill, Sadie whispered. Her father knelt down in front of her. Oh, sweet baby, we can't go back for it now because it's too dangerous, he whispered as he hugged her and started into the woods. Why we leave it anyway? Sadie sobbed. She couldn't understand where they were running to and why. Without her sparrow. Sarah took Sadie's face in her hand. They was going to fetch the boys in the morning. We heard it ourselves. They was going to be auctioned off. Ain't nobody taking any one of my babies, Sarah mumbled. They all walked in silence through the woods after that. It seemed like hours. Until Thaddeus put up his hand. They could hear rushing waters. That's the Ohio, Thaddeus whispered. And that's the water we going to cross tonight. Adam nodded. Sadie's heart was beating so hard she could hear it. Thump, 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 thump. As they came to the bank of the river, they could see a small rowboat near the shore. I hear, a girl's voice called out from the shadow of the boat. Get in. They all crawled into the rocking boat. The current took the boat right away. The boat girl rowed with her head bowed so they couldn't see her face. Adam knew all about the boat lifters. He knew not to call Sarah and his children by name, so if Patty Rollers took to beating the girl, she couldn't tell him names that she had never heard. He knew she wouldn't look at any of their faces, so she couldn't tell him about faces she'd never seen. The girl took to pulling them oars with the power of a grown man. Sadie and her brothers caught their breath when the boat leaned way over with the strong current. Hush now, the girl said. Sound carries across the water. I done this so many times, I know every turnback, bottom rock, and whirl round in this here river. So don't none of you worry or fret. All of them watched as the shore of Kentucky disappeared into the fog. They all tried to look ahead for the shore of Indiana, where they were headed. But the fog was thick, the boat pitched and rolled, and the water commenced to boil underneath them. Sadie, Ben, and Cyrus began to cry. John was trembling and clenched his teeth. They all knew that none of them could swim. You know, there's a line right down the center of this here river, the rowing girl called out. On the other side of that line, on one side of that line, you is owned. The other side, you ain't. And we crossing over that line right now. They all looked at the water beneath them. All the fish on the Kentucky side ain't free. But on the Indiana side, they is, the boat lifter said. Pretty soon, you be as free as them fish. The boat turned on itself a few more times, and then, as fast as the turning came, it was gone. They could make out a little finger of land not too far ahead. Soon, the boat grounded ashore. Folks, this here's Indiana, a free state, the rowing girl announced. The crosswhites tumbled onto the shore. Watch for a lantern on that there ridge. They'll take you where you be safe, the rowing girl whispered. Then, without another word, she backed oared the boat into the river. The crosswhites just stood there in the blackness of the night. They all pondered on that girl. She had risked her life for them, and probably many others. Yet they didn't even know her name. They listened to the shuffling of her oars till there was no more sound of them. Adam drew in a deep, long breath and sighed. This here is free air, he cried out as he fell to his knees and he slapped the mud. They knelt there with him, handed and huddled together, all of them taking gulps. of that free air. They slept all of that day, only to set out again as soon as it was dark, traveling only at night so as not to be seen. And so it was, night after night. Adam watched the North Star and followed it to the next safe farmer house on what everybody called the Underground Railroad. Some places were marked with a piece of calico tied to a bush by the front door, while others had pots standing on the fence post. If the pot was standing right side up, it was safe to come to the barn. If the pot was turned over, it wasn't. It seemed to Sadie that she and her family had been on the run for days and days. They all had blisters sloughing on their heel caps and toe tops. Sadie's nightmares seemed to be getting worse and worse, but they had to press on, bound for Canada, where they would be safe. One night, as they heard dogs off in the distance again, they all packed up and ran till they could taste the blood in the back of their throats. Near daybreak, they sloshed through a creek after their daddy. The dogs can't take up our scent through water, he said breathlessly as he ran behind all of them. If the dogs get our scent, then we's done for, Cyrus muttered. There were many nights like this, but the Crosswhites kept tracking through the cornfields, climbing up bluffs, rolling through muck and mud, always in the cover of the night. Pretty soon, one barn looked like the next. John took to carrying Sadie pretty regular, but ever northward they walked, holding for Canada. Then one morning, Sadie was shaken awake by an old dark woman. Sadie sat up. She was sleeping in a real bed, with cool, fresh smelling linens on a soft mattress. She didn't even remember getting into the bed. Baby dear, the woman purred. Look at this precious child. She touched Sadie's cheek. We're gonna rub lard on your ashy skin and take crooked no on iron to your hair. We'll fix you up like a shiny new penny. Where's my mama? Sadie asked, pulling the sheets up to her chin. Oh, she right here. Your whole family is. They downstairs at the table eating a fine breakfast. The old woman beckoned Sadie to follow her downstairs. When Sadie got to the kitchen, everyone was at the table. It was groaning with good food. They was hot cakes, molasses, eggs, bacon and grits, and fresh milk. It was the first time the Crosswhites had sat at the table in a long time. Sadie eased into a chair, then she looked out the window. Mama, it's daytime. She jumped out of her chair, dove under the table, and rocked, her arms around her knees. The patty rollers will get us. The patty rollers will get us, she chanted. Her mother pulled Sadie up into her lap. The old lady rubbed Sadie's back. Child, you in Michigan, a free state. There ain't no patty rollers here. You in Marshall. This town is part of the underground. We help runways here. That's what we do. You can call me Aunt Della. Everybody does. She sang out as she eased Sadie back into her chair. And this here is Miss Nancy Reed, my neighbor. Miss Nancy turned from the stove and spooned up eggs and grits for Sadie. Are we really safe here? Sadie asked in between bites. Safe as newborn lambs, Miss Reed exclaimed as she poured coffee for Adam and Sarah. Why, I heard of Marshall, Michigan, Adam said. It seemed he heard from an old friend, Moses Patterson. They'd met on one of Adam's trips to sell products for Master Gilman. Moses used to live in Marshall. Adam was sure of it. Why, Moses told Adam that near 2,000 people lived in this town and that 60 of them were African American. Moses said all the colored folk in town knew each other, and when a stranger came through, they was watched to see if and they were spies for the South looking for runaways. Even most white folks here in Marshall don't cotton to keeping slaves. They dead set against it, Nancy went on to say. Now that don't mean that you can trust all the white folks here, Aunt Della warned. But we'll show you the ones that you can. Oh, Daddy, Mama, can we stay here for a while? I'm so tired of running, Sadie pleaded. Canada is the only place we'll be safe. It's still against the law of the land to help runaway slaves, Adam said. Please, Daddy. I don't think I can walk another step, Cyrus pleaded. Not another step. Ben and John chimed in. Just as Adam and Sarah were pondering, there was a knock at the door, and in strode the tallest man Sadie had ever seen. He was wearing a stovepipe hat that made him look even taller, and he was as skinny as a yard pole holding up a line of washing. Miss Anthony is going to pause here for today, and we're going to pick up tomorrow right here, January Sparrow. I hope to see you back tomorrow and get your mind and your heart ready for a new story. All right. It's good to see you. Reading with Miss Anthony, first installment, part 1. See you tomorrow, guys.